Welcome to a conversation about courage, the kind that doesn't just transform your career, but also your body, your pleasure, and your entire relationship with intimacy. My guest today is Chloé MacIntosh, entrepreneur and founder of Kama, a platform revolutionizing the way we approach sex, sensuality, and self-pleasure. Before diving into the world of intimacy and human connection, Chloé co-founded Made.com, a highly successful design company. She has spent years exploring how our physical, emotional, and mental spaces shape the way we live, and just how much courage it takes to break free from conditioning, embrace our desires, and fully own our sexuality. Alors, Chloé, on your app, Kama, you share a lot of pragmatic tools, and maybe along this interview we'll share some, but definitely we need to do an episode about your workshops, maybe later in Kaplankaya. But now, at the main theme of Harvest in May 2025 in Kaplankaya is about courage. I wanted to explore what kind of courage it needs to have a fulfilled sexual life and the consequences in your life in general. So let's start maybe with how you were brave regarding sexuality, as it was a taboo in your education, at school, and at home. So you've been exploring for more than 20 years sexuality. Hello, Chloé. I'm very happy to have you on this podcast.
Thanks, Rose. I'm super happy to be here.
Cool. Explore another aspect of sexuality maybe later in Kaplankaya, and I'm very happy about this. But first, I would like to explore your own courage, because it's been many years you've been studying, researching about sexuality at a time when it was not easy for you. So I guess that's courage. Can you come back on your childhood and what was your education regarding sexuality?
Yes, well, I mean, I think when we think of sexuality, very often what I'm reflected is that for me it's comfortable to talk about. And so often I think there is an understanding that it was something that was comfortable for me when I grew up, because it sounds unusual to be able to speak about it so openly. And what I've realized is actually it doesn't feel too edgy for me to speak about it now. But if I look at how it was in my family when I grew up, nudity, sexuality, even intimacy, even the relational aspect was not really alive, because I grew up with a single mother and my sister in a small place. And there was no sexuality at home. It was never really possible because there was no really a lot of private space. And my mother didn't bring anyone back, etc. So I grew up actually with the complete absence of any form of sexuality. And it was never discussed. So I never had a single conversation about it. No one told me about really masturbation or pleasure or being with men. So I ended up being quite
It was
late.
in Paris. It was in Paris.
This was in Paris where I grew up. And so I was quite a little bit more of a late bloomer, in a sense that I did certain things alongside my age group, thinking I needed to do them, but I really didn't pay too much attention until a bit later, in my early 20s, when I moved to London. I was studying architecture, and I decided to take a job in London for the summer. I ended up staying there for the following 25 years, falling in love really with that city. And one of the reasons why I fell in love with London was because I felt there was a lot less judgment and a lot more permission to be who you wanted to be. And it was it really touched me, because I started to feel and realize how much, I would say, conditioning and limitation in a way, I had experienced, and this is not a judgment in a sense, but in a way, both privilege in some ways, but also quite a close-minded environment. And so going to London was opened my mind. And that's also when I started to put a little bit more attention on the subject of sexuality, At the time, I never experienced orgasm. I was in my early 20s. And so I realized it was something for me to investigate. And being far from home, I think really gave me more space to do that.
Wow, okay. And so when did you start? You said you've been really deep into the subject after. What was the tilt and what did you do? Because you had a job. You had a job before. You've been an architect. You co-founded a company. So did you do this in parallel? And
yeah. So I think initially, I think the relationship with my sex life, I think, was shadowed by an experience that happened with my father. That is not a fully formed memory, but over the years, even when I was maybe in my late teens, when sexuality came into my life, actually, I started to have some kind of shadow, something that would come to me unclear, but certainly a feeling of something to do with my father. And I lived with this for a very long time, never talked about it, never knew really what it was. My sister and I would exchange a little bit about it, but it's not something that I ever talked about. I felt I carried a lot of shame around it, like most of the time, because these things aren't really explained, they're not really exposed, we don't intellectualize and clarify what they are, and so it doesn't help people understand. So we feel very isolated when anything like this happens. And very often with trauma is often the trauma of the trauma, it's the story you end up having in your head about something that happened, until through some of this work that I did over the years, you realize that the trauma happens for you, not to you, but it takes a while and courage to go and try and find, how can this serve me rather than deserve me. It's not easy. So I think when, in my 20s, I started to discover this, there was these blocks, and those blocks were in the way of my pleasure and, being drawn towards sexuality, etc. And so then, I got married in my late 30s, and then I had 2 sons, and we had a really healthy intimacy, I felt, with my husband at the time. And I enjoyed sex, and I thought it was great, and I felt it was also a duty as a woman, to entertain that and to play with that and to make it work. And then when we separated in 2015, which is also when I left Made.com, I had a real realization that I needed to investigate deeper and actually now focus my life on, going into places that I hadn't explored, being from like 30s to 40s. And so I would say the only other very key point that really landed was when I got pregnant with my son 20 years ago. That's also when I had a really strong impulse that being a woman, was not fully realized in the way that we live, and that pregnancy pushes you into those places by happening to your body in a sense. So that was another point for me of also, realization that going into this path of exploration is something that actually for me was a calling.
I love what you said about trauma, and thanks for sharing it. So I think your story is really brave, and you told me that some of your clients sometimes tell you that you're very brave and you don't even realize it. How does it come?
Well, because one of my pleasures and the thing that I enjoy is to talk about sexuality in places where usually you wouldn't talk about it, but you talk about it in a way that you talk about everything else. So to normalize the conversation to a point where if I say squirting, you don't have an emotional awkwardness. You starting to realize that, yes, this could be part of our conversation. And yes, it's okay to talk about all the things I talk about, from deep throating to anal sex to penetration and all these words that are supercharged with an emotional, I'm trying to just ease people out of this awkwardness. So I talk about it, but without the desire to provoke, with the desire to touch the edge where you can actually hear it, realize it's a bit uncomfortable, but still be glad that it can be discussed, you know. That's what I'm trying to strike the line, you know, so for a lot of people it feels edgy because they wouldn't be able to say those words in a boardroom, in front of people, you know, it will be very difficult for them. But what I've realized, you know, and especially actually after you and I had a conversation and you made me really realize something very clearly, is that the courage that they see probably comes more from those difficult decisions I took about going towards what's not easy and having the desire to go towards the growth and the transformation and not fear. I mean, of course, I have fears, you know, but generally, I don't know, having a sort of magnetic attraction to the unknown. Liking to be in that state because I think it connects me with my flow. I can really, you know, sometimes when I prepare for retreat or protocols with clients, most of my meditation is about forgetting everything I know. Everything I know, I want to forget completely so that when I come in front of a client, I purely rely on my intuition and my senses and what's happening in the moment, without being distracted with anything else, in a sense. And in order to do this, you know, there's an element of courage because you need to know that you've got yourself, you need to know you've got the client, you know, so there is a sort of like surrender. So I think it's the surrendering into that space that's vulnerable and a bit edgy that people reflect at me, rather than, you know, for me, courage to actually speak up about it.
And how do you encourage people to be brave in their intimacy?
Yeah, so what I notice is, and you know, I like to be practical with everything because it's not a concept, and this is what I've discovered, that if you have shame somewhere, anywhere, this is where you need to look, because the shame covers the fears to really meet yourself. The shame is using the fear as a way to turn it into something. So we have already, you know, some resistance to do something. And then if you cover it in a story where it's bad, then it makes it impossible for people to go there. It's very much the biggest resistance that I find in this work is the capacity for people to deal with their shame. So even though sometimes we think we don't have shame, we liberate it, we cool, sex is healthy for us, and that's great. But I have found that if you ask some questions, there's always some places, and it could be an emotion. It could be that you have shame because you're terribly jealous. You know, it could be that you have shame because you think about someone else when you have sex with your partner. It could be lots of reasons why we have shame, but it's always why there is shame and how can we look at the shame, because that's what would require some courage to go against the status quo, maybe what people around you believe. So it's like a breaking away.
So what do you do with that? Like, for example, let's say the woman or the man who's thinking about someone else when having being in a relationship with someone for a while and thinking about someone, a new partner they met. Of course, you could, I can see where you could be have some shame around that. So how would you explore it and how would you need to be brave in this situation?
Well, I mean, it depends a lot on, first, your position in your relationship. If the partner that you're with is the one you want to be with and you love them and your intent is to continue to work with them, that's the first. If you're not in that category, I cannot really help you, because first that decision needs to be taken. I'm working often for the union, for things to improve, for things to last, for things to work. I'm not really expert at how to break away from things. I mean, I can do it, but it's not really what I intend to want to focus on. So I always ask, are people committed if they come to me as a couple? Are they really committed, both of them, to be with each other? And if they are, then the courage first will come with the agreement of radical honesty, and to really be able to communicate around the difficult things and the things which are provoking for both people. And in order to do that, there will need to be an intent around creating a space, like a safe space, a new way to communicate that isn't just having a conversation while I'm walking away from the bathroom to the bedroom and the phone is beeping, not that conversation. One where you maybe have an altar, like I have, a space that means presence and respect and different type of rules about how we relate to each other, and light a candle maybe and sit down, and in that space we are not distracted, we are present, we are committed, we're coming into the space also with a sort of knowing where we are we calm, are we able to receive and not to engage in this conversation when we're not. And then when we sit down, it's about sharing, I have been having these thoughts when we have sex.
Wow. And you tell the name of the person or not? Or
well, I mean, the thing with honesty, it's very important with honesty that it's not necessary about being completely like saying everything that's happening. It's really being able to say the things that are helping you create the healthier, the most open, the most genuine, authentic, and real experience with a partner. So you have to be really discerning and also aligned to how you are supporting this relationship, and not pretending you're doing it, but you're not, kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
And so sharing that will be vulnerable. It will need to be done in a vulnerable way. I've been feeling a lot of guilt around it. It's not how I want to feel, but this person is coming into my... And for the partner to be able to receive this,
wow.
And maybe after they speak, when they finished, and the other person reflects back, to be able to share how that makes them feel, not how to fix it or what it is or attacking them, but how does that make you feel? Well, it's making me feel jealous, I feel hurt, blah, 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 whatever. But also being able to maybe say, well, why don't we play this fantasy? So instead of pushing that away and making it about guilt, maybe next time they have intercourse, they can bring her into it and see what she brings when it's open in the field.
Okay.
That your fantasy, my fantasy, we try to make them work, because if you do want to be together and you love each other, you can't punish yourself for having desires. You don't know sometimes. Of course, if you start engaging with it and lying about it, that's something else. But if you're just having this fantasy of someone, so it's actually the way that I had a really beautiful experience, a healing experience to do with my own trauma, was that when I had a big part of my training, which was mostly training one-on-one with a practice partner or teacher or practitioner for long periods of time, which was also a very unique and a courageous way now, I realize, to learn, because there's no escaping. And it allows me to see not just what they teach, but what they embody, but most importantly, who they are as people, and how much of what they teach is really in their everyday life, and it really teaches me the essence. And also, I capture a lot of the shadows and the other aspects. But in that way of learning, I'm able to really understand more of myself in that reflection.
How deep did you go? What were the shaping experience and the strong moments for you? Yeah,
so this is really what was, what I was thinking about now, which is this. We developed a lot of thinking in my learning around how kink and the things that are not easy for us to integrate in our fantasy world. What do they mean? And how can we integrate those parts? Because, of course, those parts are still us. they may not be accepted by society, but if we don't love them, then we will always have funny ways to deal with relational dynamic and situations, because we have this lack around something. It's not complete, it's not whole. And so one of the steps in the process was that I came across this book called The Erotic Mind. And I often talk about this, and I have a full workshop that I will actually do at Kaplan-Kaya, which is really really profound, around starting to understand where your landscape of turn-ons and arousal cues come from, the things that turn you on, that you always like it that way. You like it more that way, and if this doesn't happen, usually, for you, there's signals, situations, positions, senses, activations, things that really work for you. And because these things come from a very early childhood imprint, very often they can turn into, very positive things, but they can also limit us if, when these things happened, we didn't feel completely safe, or there was sensation of guilt or shame. Let's say you masturbate as a child, someone says, don't do that, don't touch this. It can have a very profound effect on, well, this feels good in my body, but I'm being told it's bad. How am I supposed as a child to reconcile with that? So as we don't reconcile in a moment, there is this break that happens in a sense, and that can be left as a trauma until we potentially reconcile and understand that, and maybe do the work to shift this. So we inherit a lot of these kinds of things linked to shame and guilt. And so when I was reading this book, it was explained how you can create scenes as an adult, or as whatever time is right for you, that would recreate what happened, the kind of sentiment and emotional charge and situation, and that by recreating this scene, you will be able to kind of relive the experience. And if you could invite it rather than fear it, which is what you do in your everyday life, you fear for that trauma to come back, so you're always pushing it away and pushing it away. Instead of that, you create a safe place to invite that energy in, and you somewhat transform the ending. At the ending, there is comfort, there is a conversation, there is acceptance, there is love, there is aftercare, rather than this break. And by doing this, you can kind of reconnect that pathway, or release that tension, or heal of that trauma, and not just through a different story, but having a different embodied experience of what that is. And so when I read the book, I had I was in a Eurostar on the way to Paris, actually, and I had a lot of tears, because I realized how that connected to my personal story. And so with quite a long time after that, I did a lot of research into this specific, and discovered a lot of interesting things about the world of BDSM and conscious kink, is that often it is used actually as a way for people to try and express and, experience themselves without the shame, etc. And so you were asking me about an experience that was very profound for me in terms of, healing in that way. And so I decided to use this methodology with one of my practice partners, and to actually invite this energetic of my father, which was this shadow that I was still very much living with, and to let it be a part of the experience, and to love it, and to accept it, and to be able to have a pleasure while this was also there.
Gosh, that's brave.
Yeah, exactly. That was quite brave. And after this one experience, I never had that afterwards.
Okay.
It never came back.
So it freed you.
The loving of it, rather than I think when something is taken away from you, it's a form of your heart break a little bit, and so this is piece of love that you cannot reconcile with. And I think being able to love it allowed me to reconcile with myself, and not to be this missing part that makes me broken or something, you know. So it was, it's not something that I would say works for everyone. It's not like, you know, but it's something that now has been a big investigation in my work, something I use a lot, where it's very effective. I have a method to take people through. It's, of course, very confronting because people are not prepared, but they are prepared, because if it's happening and the body is releasing, then it's because they're ready, actually. But mentally, they may not be prepared for that to kind of come back up for them. So sometimes you realize your deepest trauma once you meet the solution that can serve and help you heal it, which is what happened to me, which is what happened in my workshop when these people realize I can also help with getting through some of that. So you have to, that's again why courage is important, because, for example, they have the courage to come to my workshop, even though they know that there is something inside them. And that courage is then met with, you know, the potential way that it can help.
Wow, this is such a powerful story, because I think in intimacy you can really spend your life hiding it. It's quite easy because nobody sees it, maybe your partner, but and some people look do very brave things, or you can spend your life like looking brave but have like a very poor intimate life because you didn't explore and nobody sees it.
Yes, it's so true. And, you know, one of the beautiful things that I really feel grateful about this kind of way that I interact with people is very often they tell me things they've never told anyone, that they've never voiced sometimes. They've never heard their voice say it. And sometimes they have, but there's always a sharing of something so deep and intimate and real that I feel that I have such a window, you know, into psychology in a sense, because it's there is very few spaces and places where we can talk about this. But once you give people a chance to share, they really want to share, because they know that sharing is a big part of getting over, you know, something. If you cannot speak of it, there's not even an opportunity for change in a sense, because, you know. So I think there is always a lot like we don't know about people, and even, as you say, very accomplished human beings and people that are considered very successful in the way that success is defined, sometimes may be very immature or deviant in their relationships with their themselves, their relationship to food, or their relationship to, or maybe they could be very healthy even physically, but still have little relational maturity, which is different from being healthy and well in your body and even mentally. Relationship is like it's the ultimate layer of who you are and where you're at in your life.
When you manage to face your trauma and in a way sleep with it, like how did it change? Like it changed your sexuality, I'm sure, and how did it change your life in general?
Well, I think there was a lot of work that I had done in a way of talk therapy and breaking things down, and I had a good understanding of the picture. What the experience showed me is that unless you do somatic work, unless we reconcile with this idea that therapy is a holistic process that have many layers and points of entry, and that the cerebral layer is one, the physical layer is another, you know, the nervous system has to be readjusted, you know, then you have a heart layer, the healing of the heart, and there is a lot of, a huge area of practice around heart and healing the heart. Then there is the electromagnetic field. Some people use fork to actually heal your field, because there are some dissonance that can be, you know, so there's so many ways that we actually need to interact with the entire body in order to properly heal, so that the healing isn't just an idea that you can explain it and integrate it into your life, but you're not going to perpetuate it on your children, because you embody the change. You're not just talking about it. So for me, I was embodying this potential to love, something that is considered the darkest, unspoken trauma of society, which is anything related to incest. Yeah. It's a word we can't say, and it's something very heartbreaking that anyone in the field, the practitioner's field within sex and intimacy will affirm, is that the prevalence of sexual trauma is so great, and the prevalence of that trauma being perpetrated by people close is something that is never evoked, never discussed. And whatever level of what happened to you, there's a spectrum of everything. But it's very important to repair the boundary line and the intimacy line and be educated around that within family structures, because it is within family structures that we get mostly our program for relating as adults. So the responsibilities on the caretakers, on the caregivers, it's through children is just really, really important. And something that, for me, you're asking, what has really changed, is how seriously I take not passing on anything unnecessary to my children, for example, and being really attentive to that.
You have two boys, so I can relate to you because they're 17 and 19, I guess. I have a boy, I have a girl, but I also have a boy 10 years old. And also sometimes I'm wondering what to tell him to make him grow as a confident and exploring boy, but also respectful of the others, on a complement of taking care of yourself and looking at you and try to heal your trauma. What did you tell them that worked, you're very proud of, and what's your advice to educate boys specifically?
Yeah, so I think, thanks, it's such a nice question, because I do take this job quite seriously. And so it's nice also to share this in between parents. Very often the advice I received that were very useful actually came from parents that had children slightly older than mine. Because they would say to me, watch out with that, you may need to ask your child for consent from that point forward. I'll be like, oh, that's interesting. I've always felt invited to grab them, and actually one was needed a different approach, right? So it was really useful. Wow. I think the best advice I could give a parent who wants to give the best possible imprint around intimacy and pleasure to their child would be for them to start a self-pleasure practice, would be for them to start to really connect with what that means for them. And this is back to this embodiment part. Embodiment means that you are communicating with your whole being. There is harmony and there is resonance with all of your layers, from the intellectual to the heart to the physical to the magnetic, the energetic. You are presenting yourself with a really clear message, and it's through your body that it can be felt, because children learn that way. We are born to learn through the face of the primary caretaker, and we learn everything in that way at the beginning. So there's a huge amount of stuff that, we often say communication is very little the words, but then we don't focus on what it is there for, all the other things, which means that the embodiment part. So I would say have a self-pleasure practice, meaning connect to what sexuality means for you. How do you feel about it? How much shame do you have? How comfortable are you naked? How comfortable are you to even talk to your child about pleasure? Can you do it? A lot of parents are like, I can't do it. It's going to be too hard for me. So then do the work on yourself. And let your child be, try to be open and to joke about it, to tell them, I realize it was really hard for me to talk to you about something so important, and I want to be better. I want to learn and maybe something we do together. I think there is a way to connect always at the same level with the child, because they have as much to teach us than we to them. And even with this, this innocence that they carry, the question that they carry, maybe we forgot to ask ourselves those simple questions. What is pleasure? What is it for? So they need to be invited to ask whatever their pure soul is wondering, and make sure that the answer that we give is not going to close their heart and make them feel somewhat they're not enough, but actually to always reinforce that it's beautiful. And the second piece, that we talked about also at some point was to do with boundaries, because I think one of the most important thing about all types of relationship, whether it's with a child, at work, intimately, is being able to be good, to be masterful at being clear with your boundaries and knowing how to respect others. And being clear with your boundaries mean you know what you want. How do you know what you want? Because you have a pleasure practice, you have a pleasure practice with yourself, or a way that you practice learning about yourself. And therefore, you become more attuned with what you like. You explore yourself. You take time to investigate your own genitals, your own body. You maybe listen to some of the stuff, on the app. A lot of the things we do is trying to guide people through an audio masturbation, where we help them understand how to breathe better when you feel pleasure, how slow to go, where to go, how to touch, so that you just get to explore new ways to do it without having to think too much, what's happening. And the idea to bring curiosity and novelty, rather than always repeat something that we know because it works. Really treat this area the way you want to be treated in your sex life.
Right.
If you want novelty, curiosity, excitation, you need to first being able to do this with yourself, to provide these answers for yourself. In a lot of tradition, the idea that you are your best lover. You have polarities within yourself, because you can turn yourself on and be your lover, be the person touching and the person receiving. Right. Your body actually has the same response, almost hormonally, etc., when it's you touching yourself or someone touching you,
Good
so
advice.
There's a lot we can do.
In the morning.
Yeah, a little, to be able to have this relationship, to actually, I was listening to Ram Dass last night, who's really my favorite, and he was talking about self-love, when he got his first spiritual experience, actually allowed him to love himself so much. And I think the practicing, physically practicing, not just telling yourself, those manifestation or invocation, or I think really to do it, is very powerful. So that's the boundary part, is knowing yourself, and then the receptiveness of it means that you can receive someone's boundary without getting upset or taking it personally, or think if they don't want something, it's because you're doing something wrong. That's the importance of being masterful with boundaries, because it really allows the depth of relationships and the depth of pleasure. And through trust, and you can play more with the edges, which is exactly where we want to go, is on these edges.
Wow, I really liked what you said earlier about being radically honest, and how it can be, for example, fantasizing about someone else and being honest about it could bring novelty, because you discuss, you share it, and it brings novelty. So I really appreciate that. In a time, and probably it was always the case, but it's true that sharing the bed with the same person for years can also bring boredom. Also, you'll be tired of being with the same body, the same person all the time. Mm-hmm. I guess it's a question that people ask you all the time, like to be a bit tired of doing the same stuff with someone.
Yes, absolutely. And again, my research is very focused around this concept of the sacred union, trying to really, for me, the idea, I believe in the fact that a lot of us want to have a one person that we relate and want to feel many things with and be able to build a future with. And that feels good for a lot of people. That doesn't mean that it doesn't come with some interludes or other events where we're doing these things completely differently, and everything is very much invited. I think the invitation to explore various types of relationship is sadly not been the case. And so we've been limited a lot, actually, and as a result, not being honest with some of the things that we could be feeling, right? So the first step is to give yourself permission to explore even the things you don't think are for you. Maybe explore them. You'll differently discover something. So me, I think I'm generally more of a monogamish kind of person. You know, I love the idea of being with another, but I have been in many situations where I was able to experience or understand or get close to or different types of relationships. And what the real learning behind that was that the relationship that were somewhat less conventional had more honesty in them. There seemed to be a parallel of accepting that someone has a slightly different or more open or diverse way to see their own sexuality and what's in their fantasy, really called in for more vulnerability, more self-care. People are more responsible for their emotion, their pleasure, because they really have to communicate around it. So there's a lot more accountability. So there was a lot of learnings for me, almost, that I think could be very valuable in a relationship with just one person. So the first thing would be that it's nice to explore and to feel invited, and there's more and more spaces now. And I think the younger generation feels so much more, I think, open. When I think about my generation, when I look about my children's generation, they are very open about a lot of things. For them, many things that for us were totally taboo have been very, very normalized. And so I think that I feel very positive, actually, about the way things are going and how things are changing personally, because I think their level of exposure, the information they receive, the diversity of cultures that they learn from, all these things contribute to actually making them more mature in relationship at a much younger age, is how I see it. But for long-term relationship to last, as you were asking me, one of the things which I've discovered is that we don't have a good understanding of our own composition. And what I mean by this is our archetypes. So there is this idea that we are more like this and more like that. And very often there's a lot of labels around our personality and who we are, and maybe attachment patterns and, you know, human design. And, you know, we like to have a descriptive of who we are. But as a result of this, I think we misunderstand or forget that we actually have all of the archetypes already inside us at all time, by the way. You know, there is sometimes some teachings that come a little bit more ancient, where you learn that archetypes somewhat correspond to cycle of life. You know, you first, you know, this young woman, that maybe you're the maiden, then maybe you're the queen, then maybe da-da-da. And I actually think that it's not quite correct in my experience, or at least maybe now it's different in our modern days, that everyone actually has all of this potential at all time. Okay. So you can be in your 20s and be a queen if that's kind of where you want to experience yourself. And so when we get married, often we freeze a little bit who we are archetypally. We position ourselves, and then sometimes it changes. Of course, we become a mother, so there's another type of archetype that comes in, which maybe affirms us in many ways. But for the relationship, it's going to create, as you say, potentially boredom, simply because we are not exploring the potential of being in a different kind of makeup of archetype, and that as you become a mother, sometimes you let go of the slut archetype, or there's an archetype that's very much around this free, provoking way to be a woman, and I see this.
And the
also
look
happen
of
a lot.
the look of the father also changes. Yeah.
Everything changes, physically changes, maybe we change the way we dress, there's a lot of changes that happened. And I also noticed this a little bit in some spiritual community, actually, where as we, spirituality becomes something where we are more conscious and aware, etc. Sometimes the sexiness, the sluttiness, the dirtiness disappears from those spaces.
Yeah.
It's almost like the goddess and the slut cannot reconcile because they think that they are not reconcilable, but they are, because it's just a matter of energy, what you want to put out, and you can mix it up. So one of the other workshops that I do is actually really helping people play with being in the different ways, being this seductress, being this nurturing, being this submissive, being all of the ways that we can be, all these energies that we can embody, which will then polarize the other person automatically in the opposite archetype, because that's what polarity really is. So by positioning yourself in a particular way, so at home, in a relationship, if you have good honesty and good communication, you can share about your fantasy. You can share about the thing, that really turns me on. I like when I want you to just stop me in the corridor and do this. And that's not going to be your everyday life, but knowing maybe that you want something like this, then it takes your partner to get out of their own way, and take the courage to embody the dominant, whatever, provoking, slightly more aggressive masculine, which they often are told they cannot connect with, which then doesn't allow for that polarity in the woman to become very submissive, because they need that, right? So being able to reclaim and also heal that wound of what is acceptable as a masculine and a feminine, reconciling with the slut, the slut training that exists, where you become this and you're in a group of people. Me, I did this, and you're in a group of people, and you are the total slut, and everyone is supporting you and encouraging you and telling you it's completely amazing. Me, I carried a lot of shame about being a good girl and always being perfect. As a French Parisian, there's quite a lot of projections, which I just thought was how it's supposed to be. And I did a lot of judgment on myself around, how to expose your body or not, how, to carry yourself, if you're drunk, this, I had so much of that. And London liberated me all of this, because women there, they feel free to be drunk and sit in the street and not have this
with less judgment. Wow.
less judgment, exactly.
Yeah. Wow, that's cool. To bring back the play also in the sexual field, I think it's quite important. You were mentioning shame, and maybe we can touch this quickly about the physical. We're talking about emotional shame, but the physical shame. Let's say, for example, a woman who has feeling ashamed of the tummy, or the man who's a bit ashamed of the size of his genital. What do you think it's linked to something emotional, or it can just be physical? And how would you advise to look at this and to play with this? Because you say shame is where you have to look at.
So if, for example, you are going into intimacy and you're starting to touch with a partner, and maybe it's a new partner, and suddenly their hands is moving, and then it's coming onto your belly, and then you start to feel, oh, my belly isn't the way that I want it to be, and maybe now I should hold my belly, and those things. So you're going from a physical experience, from a nice connection, and suddenly you're in your head with something, right? So the shame basically blocks you away from the pleasure, from the connection, from the moment, the present moment, because the present moment basically reminds you that there is something that you are not dealing with, and it's charged in your body. So as the body is touched, you think about it. And so some of the ways that can be helpful in the moment is to connect to your senses, and so try to go back into your body and really breathe into it and let it, relax, because often there is tension that comes with it. Focus on the smell, focus on all the places where your body is touching, reconnect, bring your attention back into the body and through the breath, and start maybe to move a bit. Sometimes when we are still and we are not really, moving with the experience, this is more easy to get stuck in our head. So movement, breath, connecting with your senses is a really nice way, and also actually using the pelvic floor, which is often something I also recommend, is a really nice way to drop into the body when something is in your head, whatever that is to start connecting to the pelvic floor and to kind of squeeze and push and just bring energy down in that area, because it really grounds us in some ways. So the first thing would be, when something like this happens, the first thing is having tools to go back into the body and not get stuck, because if you get stuck, then the experience stops, you're kind of no longer in it, and it can it can start playing with you and you're no longer responding, so knowing to come back out of it is very important. Otherwise, I would say one of the practices that I really, again, use a lot in my workshop and that really works is worshipping. And this idea that in the field, often we talk about armors in the way that how the body holds. And when there is an armor, it prevents the body from feeling. And the armors are processes that the body puts in place to protect us. So, for example, pain, let's say, is an armor in a sense that the body generates pain when the way we are being touched does not feel good, is not good for us. So the body just brings the pain. And sometimes when the pain isn't really respected, or in other ways, sometimes with trauma, we also can experience numbness as an armor. And then we could also experience boredom as an armor, in a sense that if you don't enjoy sex after 5-10 minutes, it's because you don't really have sensation, you're disconnected. So that's also a way that you disconnect. But interestingly, gaze, looking at something, looking at yourself or someone looking at you, can also create an armor, which means that if someone looks at you in a negative way, then or say something about your body, you can actually get shame from that. And so one of the ways to repair any form of shame with any part of the body is to actually create an adoration process, where the way we look at it and the way we touch it is with such reverence and love. And it needs to be done really in an embodied way, as your partner, or this can be done between two women can do this to each other. There's nothing sexual about it. I touch your belly, I put my hands, and I almost bow myself. I say beautiful things. Literally, this process of adoration, of worshiping, can completely repair and transform your own then relationship, because your experience of that, you felt it through someone else, and that transmission. All the work in this field is transmitted. That's why it's so important to have a very clear vessel, because you're transmitting something to another by feeling it into your own body and intentionally wanting them to receive it. If they are safe enough to receive and you get the feedback, that's intimacy. You've touched, you've connected. So you can, and this is very valuable on the genitals. Genital worshipping is a really beautiful practice, which is basically sometimes I could do with one man naked, and everyone completely complimenting. They receive things in their ears about how incredible they are as people. It's like a very beautiful. It brings you to tears. Plus also the experience of receiving is very rare, is very unique, and it's so profound just to receive actually.
Yeah, and I guess we're so much mistreating our bodies in general. Chloé, I really want to do something in Kaplankaya after your workshop, and I'm excited for you to share in Kaplankaya in Turkey what you've done with people at Harvest. Just before leaving you, I would like to ask a last question about Kama, your app. It's funny because you're sharing really deep things about sexuality, and your app is more about pragmatic tools. How do you explain this? And what do you want to take, Kama? What's your plan for the fabulous app, Kama?
Thank you so much. So Kama has been a part of my journey. You know, I wanted to both, I was thinking as an entrepreneur, what can I do to use my skills and to use this opportunity that I think there is to bring more and better sex education, to as many people as possible. And so the app is really, for me, the perfect product. It's a scalable model. It's a private place where people can learn. It's an environment where it can evolve a lot. Once I've built, the framework, the user experience, my idea is to continue to bring more and more content, more and more topic, to expose people to new experts, to new ways of thinking, and to become really just the best resource for sex information and sex education. And there are definitely two facets, In the education process, there is the mindset change, which comes from better knowledge and nuanced knowledge, which is the part on the app where there's some talks and conversation, and also a lot of the podcasts, I organize them by topics, and they go there as well, so that there is a narrative, some kind of new framework for people to connect with, because that's so important that we actually also have an idea, what are we aiming to create? How do we inspire each other to create a better story for what relationship could feel like, for what sexuality could feel like, for what it's like to talk about sex to our children, so the formulation is very important to me. But of course, the second part of learning is the practical, the transformation, the practice. It took me more than 10 years to realize that I won't learn much about sexuality until I go into it myself. And that's when I started to more practice and work with only people who touch bodies. I do not learn from anyone unless their life has been dedicated to touching bodies, because I feel that that's the biggest gap in the healing process, in the educational process, even within the medical field. There is no education around pleasure. There's no doctor for pleasure. There's no one you can ask about your sexuality in the entire medical field. So there's a gap on so many levels. So for sure, I want to bring those two aspects. Always have a bit of a narrative and some practical things you can do every day that can help you with the journey a little bit.
Wow. And you said you were going to give a discount for people, for our listeners?
For sure, I'll give 50%. Wow. I would love as many people to try it and also reach out to me for feedback. I'm very open to learning. This is because there aren't a lot of examples to work with. I have often to make things up, and I draw a lot of course, inspiration from my conversation with people, using the app and telling me how to improve. So I'm very receptive to this and always looking for support in any way.
Well, thank you. I'll put it in the show notes of the podcast. Chloé, it's been such a pleasure to have you. Thank you for sharing your journey. Thank you for embodying courage on a sexual and level, and sharing it, and in general, in life in general. And I'm very happy to have had you for this episode of the Harvest series.
Thank you so much, Rose, for holding space. I really appreciate, and I can't wait to spend some time in June.
Yeah, see you in Kaplankaya.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.